So, hello and welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm super excited about today's session, Inside Risk Prediction. So, I'm joined today by Hayden Cardiff, who is the founder and chief innovation officer at Idelic. For those of you that don't know, Idelic is a company leveraging AI and machine learning to improve safety and risk management for trucking fleets and insurers. Welcome, Hayden. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
So I'm really excited about today's session. We're going to be talking about risk prediction, but in predictive analytics, and really talking about how fleets are using all the data that they're getting
Yeah.
from all of these dozens of sources. ELDs, dash cams, claims information, violations, all these places they're getting how they're taking that data, depending how you like to pronounce it, and actually doing something with it and using it kind of like a crystal ball. It sounds kind of futuristic. Um, Maybe before we jump into all of that, why don't you tell us a little bit about Idelic and what Idelic is about?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to jump in. So again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and looking forward to nerding out on data with you as well. So again, my name is Hayden Cardiff. I'm the founder here at Idelic, and what we do and what we are is really our whole goal is to make sure we can help drivers get home safely each night. That's the goal. Right. And to your point, Michael, the way in which we do that is by helping fleets utilize and leverage all the data that they have to understand driver risk and then be able to use that data and be able to highlight who is most at risk, be able to coach those drivers more effectively, be able to have an entire platform to be able to manage your safety program as a whole. And so there's a lot that goes into it, but we're going to really focus, I think, on some of the predictive analytics side, and as well as some of the coaching, and those are obviously two key pieces of what safety teams and safety professionals have to deal with when it comes to improving their safety operations and improving their overall safety program. So, looking forward to diving in.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, and thanks for that. So, like I was saying off the bat, I mean, we're talking about all of this data then, and fleets are getting more and more data all the time. Like it seems like every time you turn around, there's a new piece of technology that you can put into the cab that'll give you more information, or tech that can grab information from somewhere else, and it's kind of overwhelming. And you start to wonder, can you actually do anything with this stuff? And there's the promise that AI and machine learning can help us make sense of it. And I said off the bat, it kind of sounds a little bit like science fiction, like crystal ball, but like I guess is it like is it science fiction or is it real? Are we there? Can we do this? And I guess sort of a two-part question, can we do it? Is it real? But like how has it changed in the last few years? Because Idalic's been in this business for a while now. So
Yeah.
seeing how this has evolved, like where's it come from and where are we now? Sort of.
Yeah, that great question. And yeah, we've been at this for over a decade now, which is crazy to think about. And we were jumping into it before it was cool and sexy. We did a lot of explaining and educating in the early days as to what even machine learning is, what's the difference between that AI and data science, all those different things. So it's been a really interesting journey throughout just again over the last 10 years being able to see the path of how we as fleets and I guess the industry as a whole has started to better understand and gravitate towards using data, not being afraid of it, not being afraid of what happens when we use it in court to defend ourselves, right? Like there's so many things that we can kind of get into, but it has definitely seen a big transition in how we start to look at and understand driver behavior. And I think to your point, like, is it a crystal ball? In a basic sense, you can kind of look at it that way. Absolutely. Like, I don't think it's wrong to say, but I think for anyone who knows what they're talking about, to say that you can predict when and where and who is going to get into a crash is inaccurate. Like that's it is impossible to go in and say with definitive certainty like this is or isn't going to happen. But what you can do is you can leverage the data based on patterns and highlight who has a higher likelihood of getting into a crash, right? And I think a good way to look at this and a good way to think about it is you look at Amazon or any of the other, any of the kind of big box stores now. You go to Amazon, and if you're shopping online, right, you have your, what you're searching for, but then they'll surface up to you, hey, here are some suggested items based on either what you have in your cart or based on what you've already bought in the past. How do they do that? They do that because they have millions and millions of other buyers who combined with all of the other patterns of behavior that they have, what their what they've looked at, what their search history is, what their buying patterns are, even some of the demographic information around, like what kind of credit cards you use, um, your essentially your income levels, all of those things gives a buyer profile, and they have millions of different buyer profiles, and they know that people who look like you who buy this thing also buy these other things. Now, is that magic?
Yeah.
No. It is extrapolating off of patterns. And so the same way, and I don't know about you, Michael, but like Amazon's got me pegged pretty good, right? Like they know
They
they
do.
got me pegged pretty good. Where it is, it is very accurate to say like the things that I'm searching for, the things I search for, the things I put in my cart, the things that I buy, they provide these suggestions. There's always a reason I can always give a reason to myself that I also need that thing. Uh, and so it kind of comes down to the same thing in safety, where if you have enough data, the right signals, and you have a predictive model that can sort through the noise to understand the actual patterns, you can then look at and say, here are the actual preceding events, the preceding behavior that tie to a driver with a certain type of demographic, certain type of tenure, running certain routes in certain parts of the country, right? You can get very, very accurate in understanding drivers with these profiles doing these things end up getting into a crash in the next 30, 60, 90 days.
Okay. So is pattern recognition is kind of what's happening. So and you mentioned like if you have enough data. So how much data is enough data? And like does this can this work for like a small fleet the same way it can a large fleet, or do you need to have like a certain level of information?
Yeah, enough data. That's a really good question. Enough data is specifically targeted towards data used to what's called train or
Okay.
essentially teach the predictive model
Yeah.
what is or isn't risky, what is or isn't correlated patterns, right? So you could be a small fleet with 15, 20, 30 drivers, right? And you can have enough data to go through a predictive model and give you really good, accurate understanding of that driver's overall risk, right? You don't need a ton of drivers if you have the right models. The issue is if you, as a fleet, are trying to build your own predictive models or build your own machine learning models, like that's where it becomes challenging because even though it might not feel like this to us in the moment, accidents are a very rare and infrequent thing.
Mhm.
And when it comes to from like a statistical analysis perspective, there just aren't that many crashes that are happening. Now, again, one crash is too many. Like in as we go through our daily, the daily struggle of managing safety at a fleet, might feel like crashes are happening all the time. However, when it comes to when it comes to just like a level of big data kind of sense and scope, it's really not that much. So any one fleet is going to have a challenge when it comes to providing enough or having enough data, both in preceding behaviors and also the actual outcomes which you're trying to predict, which are crashes.
Okay.
you're just going to struggle to have enough data to be able to be very effective on your own. And that's where looking at kind of aggregate kind of pools of data, being able to tie in anonymized, obviously, but anonymized data across multiple fleets, the industry as a whole, is really, really helpful when looking at building out these predictive type models.
Okay. Makes sense. All right. So you're pooling data from multiple sources and not just your own. Okay.
Yeah.
So so the risk prediction is one thing, but acting on it is, in the right way is another. I want can you paint a picture of like how your customers are using data and this kind of information today, and how they're integrating it into their coaching and their training systems?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously that's the biggest piece of it. I think it's one thing to say like, hey, I can have a predictive model or the ability to leverage the data to highlight who's going to get into a crash. All
Mhm.
that's fantastic. However, if you don't have the ability to actually change driver behavior to prevent that eventual crash from happening, it makes no difference. And so this is where it becomes really, really important to have one, the right process and team in place, but also two, the right mentality when it comes to how do I use the data to get on the same side of the table as the driver, to be able to work with them to change and improve and to get to be safer on the road as opposed to coming down and feeling heavy-handed and feeling like safety is the principal's office, for example. And so typically what we see with a lot of our customers, like historically, the information and data they have is coming from a telematic or camera device, which those are fantastic, right? Like we are huge proponents. If you don't have cameras in your truck, like you're behind the curve, please. Like that is a very, very important piece of data. It's helpful for coaching, super critical for exoneration. I can go on and on. Cameras are terrific. However, right now, kind of the industry standard historically has been I get a camera, I see all these events come in, and one by one, I try to go and coach them as they come in, and I mark them as coach complete and then go to the next one. So you're just kind of doing this hand-to-hand combat on a daily basis, trying to stay as much as you can out in front of all these events that are coming in. But honestly, there's just too much to be able to coach every single one. So oftentimes fleets will have to kind of close down the aperture of what comes through. Hey, I think these seven things are really important. Anytime these seven things show up, we got to coach them. Everything else kind of push off to the side as noise. So you kind of go through that process. Then you have anytime FMCSA or violation citation comes in, I coach those separately. Anytime an incident or near miss or crash happens, I coach those separate. So you have all these different workflows and streams from all these different systems coming in, and you're trying to piece all that together. Now, where does this tie in? So now, like, if you start to get away from looking at just a single piece of data, like just looking at cameras, for example, or just looking at FMCSA, and you start to leverage something like predictive analytics, machine learning enabled predictive analytics, now you can start to look at and correlate all of the data across all of those different systems, and it will pinpoint the drivers, again, across all those different pieces who are most at risk to get into a crash. And
Mhm.
once you start to do that, now your ability to spend your time and focus on the right drivers exponentially increases. Good example of this, I was talking with one of our great customers, Covenant, and Misty Olszewski, who's the VP of Safety there. She's fantastic. She was kind of explaining this to me as well and saying like, look, we in her words, she's like, we at Covenant, we have all the internal IT resources you can ask for. We have dashboards for everything. Dashboard for the FMCSA, dashboard for our ELDs, dashboard for our cameras, dashboard for this. And so we set it up to where we can see who's the biggest offenders on each of these different dashboards. And we'd coach those drivers. And we coach the drivers on the top of each of these different lists. And the issue that she came across was they were still having a lot of crashes. Like the numbers weren't going down. And so she tried to figure out what was going on, and she ultimately realized that the drivers who were getting into crashes weren't the ones who were at the top of any one of those different lists or dashboards.
Mhm.
They were just under the surface, but on several of them. And
Mhm.
so being able to leverage machine learning, the predictive analytics, the watch list that they were using through our platform,
Mhm.
they then started to see like, hey, these drivers who are, not getting flagged on any one of these different things, but they were on a lot, they're now getting pushed to the top of that watch list. So they're getting able to coach those drivers. And now the behavior started to change, accident trends started to drop dramatically, and they saw a huge improvement in their per million mile accident rate year over year over the last 4 years now, which has been fantastic to see. So it's like that was a good example to me of just like how that principle plays out in real time.
Yeah, okay, no, that's great. That's interesting. So it's kind of about stepping back and looking at the larger picture and not getting too narrow focused on one specific thing, which kind of plays into some data that we saw coming back out of our best fleets program that we just came from. We saw um, a number of our finalists were the way that they were approaching their coaching program was having multiple touch points, not just focused on I've got a dash cam event that's triggered. I've got to coach this person. I've got to assign a training based on very reactive, very
Mhm.
in some ways punitive. What we saw with our finalists and our winners was the majority of them were doing some of that, but had a much broader, overarching, proactive coaching program. So they're looking at that, taking a step back, looking at the bigger picture at how they're
Yeah.
focusing in on these programs, which makes a ton of sense. We've got a couple of questions coming in that maybe we can jump to
Yeah.
here. So the first one, do you have modules or data sets from Canada or only the US?
Absolutely. Yes. We absolutely do have. I mean, it's important to have data and insights from the specific areas, right? Like, obviously, you can extrapolate and the overall aggregate data is really helpful, even if it's not as targeted to your specific operations. But you do want data sets that are helpful and targeted to your operations as well. So the answer is yes, like Canada and US. But I think also in that same vein, right, if I'm a LTL carrier and do a lot of pickup and
Mhm.
delivery or
Yeah.
line haul, right? Like you want to be able to know that the data that the predictive models are based on has a
Mhm.
good, healthy amount of that similar type of routing, that similar type of driver behavior as well, similar to over the road, similar to some of the last mile delivery. Like, so you definitely want that diversity, or I guess this specificity around your type of fleet. But again, that makes it challenging to go and do it on your own as well, because there's just a smaller, limited amount of data when it comes to like
Mhm.
how specific your fleet is.
Yeah. Okay. Great. No, that makes sense. Another question we've got here. Gary's asking, are you using similar model to predict who would be a good hire? Just wondering if you've paraphrasing, but worked in that area. And I don't think you guys are focusing on the hiring thing. You're on the risk management and side of things. I don't know if correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you guys are into that space. Do you know if anybody's doing that in this space? Have you heard anything?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so we don't our predictive models are mainly focused on drivers who are already in the seat
Yeah.
working, working for your fleet, right? Because they're kind of gathering a lot of that behavior in cab, and you're able to go through the coaching side. From a hiring perspective, I know that there are several different methodologies that people are starting to employ. I think, obviously like you can um you can start to look at some of the historical information from a PSP or MVR, things like that. But those are still pretty sparse and not as indicative of some of the details that you're looking for. I know there are things like cognitive testing that some
Yeah.
fleets are starting to jump into to look at that pre-hire process and see if there are patterns that they can model off of successful drivers who've done well at their fleet. How did they score in some of these cognitive testings? And then now trying to match that with future hires. I've heard in some cases that that has borne some strong results. I don't know a ton about that. It's just not necessarily my area of expertise. However, I do know that AI, machine learning, can absolutely be applied to that area. And so I would highly recommend looking, and if that's an area of interest, go out there and explore. I'm sure that there are
Yeah.
opportunities for you out there.
Yeah. No, thanks
Yeah.
for for answering that. And Gary, I'll follow up after the fact because I may be able to refer you to another one of our partners that might have some insights into that. There's another question here from Roger Davis that was a question that relates to something I was going to get to later, so maybe I'll jump ahead a little bit. But he's asking, are insurance companies and the government using this type of technology? And I know in there's a blog post on the Idelic site I was reading the other day where you're talking about the fact that insurers are increasingly looking at tools like this and predictive analytics in their safety programs. What are you seeing in terms of what insurance companies are doing, what they're looking for, how this all ties into that? Because insurance is a massive expense and growing problem. So,
It is, yeah. Insurance is definitely one that is very interested in this type of technology, more so this type of data. As you know, insurance companies are very slow moving in kind of their thought process and how they go about changing anything that they've done to pricing models, anything they've done to their underwriting box. Like all of those things are pretty sacred, and it takes a pretty heavy act of Congress on their part to be able to move and shift and navigate. However, they know that this is the future. They know that they need telematic information. They know that they need some of this prescriptive information to be able to turn the tide in the profitability arena, which they have been hurting over the last decade and a half. They've been really, really struggling. Insurance carriers have continued to have to push rates because they're losing a lot of money because a lot of the litigation and a lot of the costs continue to go up. And so it's just been a big struggle for them. And so they know that they need to be able to get more data, get more analytical in how they underwrite and how they go about pricing, being able to better incentivize fleets who are doing it well versus
mhm,
the fleets who aren't. And so absolutely they're looking at this kind of information, looking at this kind of technology. But again, like an individual fleet who's struggling to leverage some of this technology on their own because they don't have enough data, insurance carriers are in the same boat, candidly.
mhm,
We've talked to a lot of them where they just don't have access to enough data yet. I mean, they have obviously all the claims data, but when it comes to comparing that to details around the crashes and what happened from a behavior standpoint beforehand, what was the driver doing from a telematic standpoint or a camera standpoint or FMCSA, like there's so many of these other pieces that are kind of missing that they're
mhm.
that they're that they would need to and are trying to get access to, but it's very much coming, right? I think not too far in the distant future here requirements for fleets to be able to offer up their telematic information as a way for them to kind of benchmark and see where you're at from a safety perspective in the kind of binding and pre-insurance phase, I think is very much on the table.
Yeah, and it was interesting to say because as you were talking, I was wondering, like, do you think like we're heading to a place where like providing access to this information is kind of a requirement to be insured? Like you're not getting a policy or you're not getting a reasonably priced policy without
Yeah.
sharing this information.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where after many, many conversations to a lot of different insurance carriers, that is the direction that they would like to go. Obviously, that's the direction that would be helpful for them, helpful for, candidly, helpful for the industry, because the fleets who are doing it well are going to look good. And like and the fleets who look good are the ones who are going to get better rates or at least better leeway on some of the policies and on some of the underlying terms. And so, just similar to what we're seeing in the market today of, yeah, like we want to loosen capacity. I guess we want capacity to kind of tighten a little bit because we want some of the bad actors out of the industry. Insurance carriers want the same thing, and fleets should want the same thing of, yeah, no, like I know I am one of the better performers. Here's my data, here's my information. I'll prove it to you. Great. Now that you know that I'm one of the better performers, give me better rates. Right? Like that level of
Yeah.
confidence, I think, will be important as we jump forward here, but I think it's also going to be to your advantage if you're doing it well.
Yeah. Great. I'm going to come back to before we jump into questions. You were talking about that one example where you had the client who had multiple dashboards they were looking at, and they were seeing problem drivers that they're addressing them, but not getting to the ones that were the underlying real problems. So looking at one larger focused dashboard gave them better
Yeah.
results. One of the things that we noticed again in our best fleets data that we got back was, and this was really interesting. The number one way that we're finding fleets were measuring the success of their safety program was based on the like a score or an effectiveness score from some sort of a tool, like potentially like Idelic or another tool, which was higher than other things like more traditional scores, like crash costs, their DOT stats, things like that. It actually surpassed that. Like that's the number one way, which I kind of get it. Like you've got this one number to focus on, which helps you keep you focused. Uh, Is there any risk in that sort of almost myopic focus
Hmm.
on a single number, or is that okay because it's counting enough stuff that you're actually
Yeah.
getting something bigger?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think you as a fleet need to understand what's most important to you, right? And I think it is still incredibly important to understand what's driving the business, what's driving executive decisions, what's driving the health and effectiveness of the company. And I think cost is going to be a big part of that, right? In safety, one of the kind of burdens that we have is that we're always kind of looked at as a cost center.
Mhm.
And although I can defend till I'm blue in the face that, man, like being safe and having a safer fleet drives such a higher amount of profitability, such a higher amount of sales effectiveness when it comes to the market. At the end of the day, people are still going to look at safety as a cost center, and so I think it is important to understand and look at what are the biggest goals that are driving it. So I think it still is very critical to have a keen eye and a strong understanding of where are we at with certain overarching safety metrics,
Mhm.
accidents per million mile, total cost of risk, CSA, CSA benchmarks and or thresholds, right? Like those things absolutely are still very important, still very critical. But I think the idea of the fleets that you're mentioning when it comes to looking at a more preceding score, whether it's looking at a camera, overarching camera score for all of their for all of their drivers, or kind of their own internal scorecard, or whatever the case is. I think the idea, which is also sound, is
Mhm.
like inputs lead to outputs. And when you're dealing with things like accidents or crashes that are fairly infrequent or can be at
Yeah.
times, um, not your fault. right? I mean, we're all, acutely aware of large nuclear verdicts like Werner and things like that, who after finally nearly a decade, um, got that reversed. But man, there's tens of millions of dollars on their books tied up to a crash that they felt very strongly that they had nothing to do with, right? Like those things still happen. So in those cases, right, is it important? Can you only look at total cost of risk? Can you only look at accident rates? No, because that might be somewhat misleading because there you could be doing all the right things and still be getting dinged on the back end. Now, can you only look at the inputs? No,
Mm.
because
Yeah.
you still have to look at and you still have to look at the actual outcomes, right? And for a good example of this is, we talk to a lot of fleets where inside of the predictive model, inside of, as we're kind of getting them set up, there's a flag of, preventable, non-preventable on certain accidents, right? So a lot of times people are like, well, like, should we just like not count the non-preventable crashes? Even things like animal strikes or something along those lines. And our recommendation is always to count them and let the machine learning know that they are flagged as
Okay.
not as non-preventable, and they will account for it in the model. Now, because what we found is if you've got a driver with three, four, five non-preventable crashes, like there's something going on there, and that still
Yeah.
is a indicator of risk, and those drivers are from the data still fairly risk in indicative of higher risk. And so like even in the things that we might deem as uh, even the thing that we might deem as not important or inconsequential or not effective, like in aggregate, if there are patterns, it still could be something that's important to look at. So I guess I say a long-winded answer to say you can't myopically look at one side or the other, just the inputs or just the outputs, but you have to be able to track both and use both to fully understand the safety story that's actually being told on a day-to-day basis so you can use that insight to make better decisions to improve your safety outcomes, right? So if you're only looking at just the accident per million mile and you have a great year, but then, but your telematics events are going up, your FMCSA inspection violation citations are going up, near misses are going up, your training is not as effective, your managers are just pencil whipping all of their coaching. Like the inputs might be terrible, but you just got lucky and had a good year, or a good quarter,
Gotcha.
or a good
Yeah.
half, right? Or vice versa. You're doing all the right things and you just had a couple bad, unlucky crashes that weren't your driver's fault. So you can't do one or the other or oscillate too heavy. You have to be able to kind of track both and then use it to discern essentially, are we doing the right things? Are we following our programs? Okay, what can we do to help and improve?
Gotcha. Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. It kind of comes back to that big picture look too. You're always keeping your eye on more than one small thing. You've got to look at the broader picture. With that, I've got a note here to ask you about lagging versus leading indicators and how to use them. Is that the inputs and outputs that you were just talking about, or is that something different?
Yeah, and lagging and leading, those would be two different kinds of inputs, right? So, this is one of the things that I think is tricky in safety is no one has a very clear definition of what is lagging and what is leading. I think there is
Mhm.
some general consensus around some specific pieces, but again, I think you can look at pieces and they can turn into one or the other based on how you use them. I'll give you an example, right? If we look at nothing but the FMCSA,
Mhm.
nothing but what comes through the portal, that would be inspections, violations, citations, obviously running MVRs and doing those kind of things. All those pieces of information are lagging, meaning that they've already happened. They are things that you would be reacting to, but more importantly, those are things that the driver the driver just got caught for.
Mhm.
And so the leading indicators might go unnoticed, but those are the things that they got caught for, right? Another good example of a lagging indicator is smaller crashes, right? Still super indicative of overarching risk because it is very true. Minors lead to majors. Like that is a very true statement, and the data plays that out. However, those are all lagging indicators, right? If I have a small, a small crash or even a major crash, like the crash has happened. You know what I mean? Like that, you can't undo that after the fact. So what is a leading indicator? Well, typically people would look at some of the camera events as good leading indicators, near misses, right? Some of the things that, hey, like it didn't end up in the thing that we're trying to prevent, which is a major crash. But too many of these drivers are going to push out there. So there is very much a a leading and a lagging type of an indicator. However, depending on how you use it, it can
Mhm.
also turn from one to the other, right? If I am only looking at telematic events coming off of my cameras and just one-off coaching each and every one of those things that come across, I am only using them as a reactive measure.
Mhm.
I'm not as effectively coaching on overarching behaviors, and it
Yeah.
becomes white noise to the driver. Therefore, all of that, even if even if the crash hasn't happened yet, it's less effective, turning into a what will be an after the fact, after the crash, looking back, hey, they had all these telematic events. Now those are effectively lagging indicators. Whereas if I look at even something like some of those inputs into, FMCSA, obviously the telematic events, the hours of service events. If I use that into a predictive model that said, hey, here are all these things that I'm seeing. If I combine them in totality, it shows a pattern, and this pattern is indicative of a crash in the next 60 days. I need to jump in and intervene. And then I start to actually coach that driver in a more prescriptive and proactive way, as opposed to just that hand-to-hand combat of back and forth on every single event. You pull a driver and say, hey, here's all of the pattern that I'm seeing. I want to make sure that you get home safe every single night. Let's work on this together to make sure that happens. Right? I've even had customers come and say like, look, we'll show them their own driving record, coming off the watch list from the predictive analytics and saying, hey, if you were a driver manager or you were a trainer or a coach and you saw a driver who had this behavior, like what would you say to them? Oh man, I'd tell them that they need to slow down. I'm telling them they need to be a little more defensive, be more aware. Tell them like they're on a bad path. I'm like, this is you, my man. Like like this is this is you. And so, those are the kind of things like when you can get on the same side of the table as that driver because you're coming before a major event. Now you can be an advocate for them. You can have a softer tone. You can help them understand a little bit more. You can be more prescriptive. And in those conversations, drivers are much more open. They're much more uh, available to be coached. They're much more, again, open to changing their own behavior, and that's when you get buy-in, right? Where drivers get a lot more closed is when you continuously slap them on the wrist every single time a telematic event comes in or FMCSA event comes in. Every time they're getting hit on the wrist, oftentimes from different people, right? Like if I've got someone managing my FMCSA, someone managing my hours service, someone managing my camera events, and someone managing my incidents and accidents, they could have multiple events from multiple of these different systems and get hit up by multiple different people in the same week, right? And so what we've found is just when you can leverage the predictive analytics and you talked about earlier, sorry to connect a through line here. You talked about earlier what's changed in machine learning, predictive analytics, like that whole arena. One of the biggest things that's changed over the last several years is the ability to peel back the black box. Historically, machine learning has just been, okay, like throw all the data into the model, shake it up, let it run, let it learn, and then it spits out a name and a number, right? And that's super predictive. It's super helpful when it comes to just like being able to identify. But then once you have that name and a number, the question becomes, now what? How do you coach this driver? What do you coach him on? How do you get the driver manager to buy in that this driver needs coaching? How do you get the driver to buy in that they need the change? Like with just a name and a number, like which is effectively like same thing like on scorecard, like it's very challenging to
Yeah.
actually drive the behavior change because it's just so opaque that like you don't know what's actually going on. So one of the biggest things that has been changing, one of the things that we've actually helped to pioneer is being able to peel back the the black box a little bit and be able to say, hey, here is the driver is most likely to get into a crash, but here's why. Here
Mm.
are the specific behaviors that are contributing most
Yeah.
to why they're at risk. So now you can go in and actually coach in a much more targeted and specific way on those particular behaviors, as opposed to just broad strokes. Hey, you need to be safer, right? Or hey, you need to slow down, or hey, like here's specifically why. And being able to target and pinpoint now allows you to really take all of those both leading and lagging indicators, package them up in a way that helps you predict the things that are going to that the driver's potentially going to crash. And now you can get in front of that driver with, as you said, multi-step, multimodal,
Mm.
multi-touch point kind of engagements that actually change driver behavior as opposed to just the one-off phone calls or one-off just lobbing a just lobbing an individual online video training across the bow and calling it a day.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I like what you're saying about the coaching and not just being reactive. I mean, it's very easy to you know like using our own system as an example, someone to have a dash cam integration that'll automatically assign a training, when a certain event's triggered. You get so many hard breaks in a week, and suddenly a training's assigned. But if that's all you're doing,
Exactly.
and it's kind of like, Pavlov's dog, right? You're training that driver that every time the phone rings or they get an email, it's like the back goes up, they cringe, oh my God, I'm in trouble again. Versus a more holistic approach to coaching that is more about um, ongoing, supportive, proactive, that person's success versus corrective. I mean, sometimes corrective has to happen. Don't get me
Sure.
wrong, but it shouldn't be the only thing, and it can be
Yeah.
counterproductive, I think, when it is. So that makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you about, because when we were, I can't remember if this was when we were talking at ATA when I saw you, or if this was an email exchange. But one of the things that I've seen come up in various places is with all this data that fleets are getting in, they've got so much information. They don't know what they have. But in the case of an accident, um, the plaintiff attorney is going to get that data and know what it is. So it's almost like maybe having all of this data is a bad thing. Should you have it all? But then you were saying something that it's actually an advantage if you're using it properly. And I just sort of wanted to peel back that a little bit. Like how can this approach help you in case of a litigation?
Yeah, phenomenal question. And this is one that we get all the time. It is starting to more and more fleets are starting to get to kind of see the light when it comes to this subject because more and more defense attorneys are being very outspoken. Doug Marcello has been one of the biggest advocates. He's a great defense attorney, very big on leveraging AI, leveraging machine learning, predictive analytics at all stages of your fleet safety operations, from hiring all the way through training and coaching. Um, the crux of the matter is that you're not creating new data by leveraging predictive analytics. Nothing new is being created. You're taking the data that's already there, giving yourself the best chance of cutting off and kind of preceding any of the major incidents, and then giving yourself the best chance of being able to defend yourself by saying that you were being proactive, right? The issue is if you don't do something, then the data still exists. The telematic data, the hours of service data, the FMCSA, past driver history, your own company's coaching process, your own coaching records, even for drivers outside of this particular driver, for drivers outside of this particular crash, right? The plaintiff's attorney is going to ask for all of it. They already know. They already know it's there. They already know it exists. And if you don't have that, then that's even worse trouble for you. But they know that data exists. So what would you rather have? The plaintiff's attorney taking that data and crafting their own very negative story and spinning that to the jury? Or would you rather have your story of we have invested in technology that allows us to be proactive, to be predictive, to understand where we should spend our time, who we should spend it with, and then we have used that in our own processes. We've now been able to get out and coach and engage with these drivers. And even if a crash happens, you have all the documented understanding of saw them, flagged them, coached them, engaged with them, put them back on the road because it follows our policies, and then something happens. Great. We did everything we can. So negligence goes out the door, right? All the punitive damages goes out the door, right? And you can start to actually focus on the the actual data or information of the case, as opposed to them trying to attack your overarching safety program, your lack of care or understanding of what's going on with the data. So it's just so much more defensible because you're showing that you know what's going on.
Okay. No, so it's kind of about the data's there anyway,
Yep,
and you need to show that you're doing the right things with the data. So if you're doing nothing, if you're just collecting this data and it's going into a big black hole and you never look at it, that's putting you at more risk than if you look at the data and act on it.
correct. Absolutely.
Excellent. That's great. I wonder if you can sort of if I'm a fleet thinking about like how could I do this? How can I start leveraging predictive analytics? Like what's a place to start? Like how do you, because it's kind of overwhelming. Like you
Yeah.
feel like there's a lot you could do and you kind of get analysis paralysis.
Yeah. I mean, the first place, the best place to start is really just by integrating and tying in all of your different disparate systems, right? Once your data is into a single place, now you can start to use some of the technology packages, use some of the data science tools at your disposal. And so really it starts with that data integration piece. And like when we work with fleets, that's the first place that we start. We integrate the ELDs, the cameras, the FMCSA portal, the dispatch, the HR, the learning management systems, the carriers edge of the world, right? Great partners. So we tie in all those pieces because that's where it has to start. We build out the hierarchy of your fleet because to be able to use that data, you want to know and be able to see and visualize and have the business intelligence and analytics to be able to see at those different areas. So that's where it has to really start. And again, you can try to take that on your own, which we've seen fleets do, not a problem. Like obviously, like a lot of people have internal IT resources and things like that. One of the things that I'm sure everyone is painfully aware of is that IT resources oftentimes don't get budgeted or allocated to safety. And so we've seen typically the best way that you can do is work with a partner to be able to go in and help to tie in and integrate that together. But either way works. And then once you have all that data together, now you can start to leverage the technology that's available, right? Data, machine learning, data science, like that is a really big part. We've obviously gone through over the last decade, and we're on version 6 now of our predictive model. And so we've spent a lot of time, energy, effort, blood, sweat, and tears in and kind of building and refining that predictive model. But that's kind of what happens next is being able to go in and take the data that you have available, right? More is better. We obviously have over 40 billion miles of driver data historically, over 500,000 unique individual crashes. to be able to see and compare. Here's the behavior. How does that compare to actual accidents that have happened? Use that to build those predictive models on. But again, you can do that within your own data sets as well. So being able to again extrapolate those different patterns, be able, use some of those modern data science capabilities, XGBoost and some of the other kind of data science packages. And then once you have that, it really comes down to leveraging your existing teams to effectively coach those drivers. So we are big proponents on kind of meeting the fleet where they're at. So we know that fleets have a process around, hey, every like these 6 or 7 things that we have to be coached every single time, right? These 7 events, regardless of where they are, what they are, whether it's the best driver doing it, worst driver doing it, they got to be coached. Great. So we've built out kind of a what we call
Mhm.
a fit management dashboard to allow managers to go in and see those specific things curated into a single list, coach them effectively, no matter where they're coming from, whether it is your camera, ELD, FMCSA. It's all pulled together. You can coach them, all the tracking and accountability pieces there. But I think also the big piece of this is being able to see the overarching trends and be able to coach in a more holistic way. So we call professional development plans, being able to have multi-step, multi-touch point engagements with that driver to focus on changing a specific behavior, right? So if you, with the predictive analytics, you say, hey, distracted driving obviously is an issue with this driver. You can assign a distracted driving plan to that driver. And that might be a 4 touch point engagement where, manager has a task to engage with that driver. A carrier's edge training gets sent out to that driver. Once it's completed, automatically pulled back in and it's logging that it's completed. Then you have another touch point, and then the safety manager finishes over a 2 week stretch, whatever the case is. And so you have that very curated and very pointed and targeted training and coaching program, but it's holistic. It has multiple people, multiple touches, and it really helps to drive home the fact that, hey, we're on the same side of this driver, and that driver has the ability to track their own progress over that time period and really change behavior as opposed to just taking a one-off training or listening on a phone call to a driver manager who says, hey, you got to slow down. Like, okay, 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 click, and then goes on about their day. Right. So those are kind of the processes that we see. Like once you get the data in, you use the predictive analytics. Once you get the predictive analytics, you go through the coaching, and that cycle, that flywheel, is what really drives the overarching results. And then, obviously having the business intelligence visibility reporting side of it, you can see and track both improvements in the inputs. So are telematic events going down? Are the coachings improving? Are we assigning the right number of plans? Are tasks getting done on time? As well as the outputs. Is the crash rate going down? What does the tenure look like of our most prominent crashes? Is the accident rate improving like we want to? Are we hitting certain benchmarks and targets, right? So having the visibility and analytics on the back end to help on both of those as well.
Okay. So, and the way you're describing that, it's really because a lot of times when we talk about solutions that are tied into AI, it's kind of about removing people and replacing them with technology, but we're keeping the human in the loop through this process. It sounds like it's more about equipping, you know, the humans to do the things that need to be done, based on the information that they're getting versus
Yeah.
this is taking the person out of it.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal point, which like technology, we are big believers. Technology has to be there to augment and improve human to human engagement
Yep.
as opposed to remove human to human engagement, right? So the integrations, for example, that is there to take off the data management portion from someone's plate so they can better engage with the drivers. Instead of swivel chairing between 8 different systems, now like, hey, this is like, here's what's in front of me. I need to go and engage this driver. The predictive analytics, instead of you spending hours and hours deep diving into who you should even talk to and why, we surface it up for you so that you can have those effective conversations, right? The coaching workflows and the platform on that side is there to say, hey, instead of managing who said what to what driver when, what was the reaction, what's the next step in this process, all that goes away. It informs you and tells you, hey, here's the driver, here's what's happened, here's what needs to happen. Great, go have this conversation with the driver. right? So it's really about augmenting and driving effectiveness with those human to human engagements as opposed to having that human element removed from the equation.
Great. Yeah, no, makes sense. I mean, I mean, we have a similar focus or philosophy at the Carrier's Edge too. I mean, we do online training, and we'd love it if everybody did online training, but
Yeah,
never instead of the in-person. You still need to have that face-to-face, that human touch.
yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
piece of the puzzle, and you need to incorporate it. So that makes a lot of sense. I've got a couple of questions that have come in here. There's sort of idyllic specific questions that I'm going to let you answer before we finish, but I have one more question before I jump to those. And it kind of comes back to what we started in. This is, very futuristic, sci-fi like in a lot of ways. Looking into the future, where do you see this going in the next 2, 3, 4 years?
Yeah. So it's really interesting. AI is starting to become a major, not just trend, but a mainstay, right? And again, where we see it and where we see the biggest impact of it is really around workflow improvement and again, helping the human element be more
Mhm.
effective. Right. So we're already starting to see like the predictive analytics is going to continue to improve and the level of insight and the amount of data coming in, incorporating some of the operational pieces, not just kind of the safety, incorporating some of the other data elements is going to be very helpful. Obviously, there's other types of prediction, like even going into some of the pre-hire stuff, like that's obviously really helpful. But leveraging AI to be able to do things like help drive decisions, right? Understanding, okay, here's a driver who's most at risk, but now even in our own platform, we're starting to use AI to surface up, hey, here's this driver, here's the summary of why they're at risk. Here's a suggested coaching plan that we would recommend. Here's what others who have gone into this type of coaching plan have done and the benefits that they've seen. Here are some suggested talking points, right? Like
Mhm.
leveraging AI to essentially make that process easier and more streamlined because the more friction we can remove from the overall equation, the better and more consistent the coaching process and the actual change management is going to be. Because again, I'll go back. We could have the best predictive analytics known to man if we can't help you also coach that driver and help your managers make it easy to go through their own coaching process, then it doesn't make a big difference. And so I think that's where I see the biggest transition is improvement in workflow, improvement in
Mhm.
the fleet and your team's ability to engage with that driver and the driver's ability to interact with the management.
Great. Excellent answer. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
So we've got a couple of questions in here. We'll just sort of wrap up on these. One of them I think you've already answered. How about, I'm assuming this is a question in relation to using Idelic. How about if the carrier only operates within Canada? Well, you said earlier you've got Canadian data, and it doesn't really matter
Yep.
what country you're in terms of operating.
Yep. And we've
Um,
got great customers in Canada, so yeah, we love our Canadian fleets. They're great.
That's awesome. And somebody else, well, this is sort of a detailed question, but just asking about your fee structure and how, if it's based off number of, I'm assuming they're asking about Idelic. If you're asking about Carrier's Edge, well, our fee structure is per driver per month, and it's really low. But for Idelic, is it based off the number of drivers or the company, the number of administrators, integration hours, kind of thing? I guess they're sort of asking how
Yeah.
you structure that.
Yeah, again, typically per driver per month as well. Can be flexible there and provide flat rate kind of fee structure as well for budgeting purposes. But the biggest piece is we do not want to disincentivize you to use the platform. So with that being said, like we don't have a cap or we don't charge for the use of data. We don't charge for the number of seats or users that you have using the system. We think that it's counterintuitive. Like we want to incentivize you to use it as much as possible. Like we've got customers who have 500, 600 different members of their team in the system using it on a daily basis to gain insights and value as they work with their drivers. So yeah, we don't have any other we don't like to nickel and dime either. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. It's kind of
Yep.
an all-in fee. It is what it is, and you can reap the benefit of that. So
That makes sense. We share the same philosophy here at Carrier's Edge. So that's why we're such good partners. So
exactly,
thanks so much,
exactly.
Hayden. This has been fantastic. I've really
Yeah.
enjoyed this conversation, and I hope everybody else did. As I mentioned off the top, we will have a recording of this that'll go out to everybody. If you have questions that you didn't ask today, you can certainly send those to us here. But if people want to learn more or ask you questions directly, Hayden, how should they get in touch? Like the website, idelic.com, anywhere else they
Yep.
should look?
Yep. Obviously, website's great, but then Hayden at idelic.com from an email standpoint also works just great.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks again, Hayden. This has been great. Thanks everybody for showing up today, and have a great rest of your, what is today? Wednesday. A great rest of, no, Tuesday. A great rest of your Tuesday.